back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got a preview episode of this week's podcast. We've got Cole Parke from the Cat's Paws on to help us preview Saturday's game. Number 12, Georgia, Kentucky, 12 p.m. Eastern Time, ABC. So he's going to help us learn a little bit about these Wildcats, get a sense of this Kentucky team that's coming to Athens. A little bit later on, we'll talk about this matchup specifically, give some predictions and how we see this thing playing out. First off, Cole, thank you for taking the time. It's the first time you've been on the podcast with us. Just how is the week going for you as you guys get ready for this game?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, happy to be here. Happy to work with the other 24/7 reporters. So it's always fun to do. And this week's been interesting. It felt like going into South Carolina, there was still some question marks as to what this season could look like. And, not to be too pessimistic, but after South Carolina, it feels like a lot of people kind of have a little bit of deja vu in terms of what this season might look like, looking back to last year. We do our usual Stoops media every Monday. We did that, heard from that, saw the depth chart. No changes from last week, despite some nagging injuries consisting there. Then every Tuesday, we go to the practice field, get to talk with the offensive coordinator, some offensive players, and that was a rough one. The offensive coordinator had a lot to say, Bush Hamden, but the players were extremely cagey. The players were it was clear they did not want to be answering questions, and there's a couple reasons for that, both game-related and some stuff on social media, but yesterday was a bit better, with the defense. We got to go to the practice field again, talk with Brad White, talk with the defensive players, and heard a lot out of those guys. So we also got our availability report, which we got last night. I believe those come out around like 8:10 p.m. or something like that. A lot more names on it than there were a week ago, but regardless, it's been pretty business as usual. But I would say in terms of mental, how the week has gone, a lot of what I've been doing is trying to do the best coverage I can of this team, but also understanding that Monday is basketball media day. And when that comes around, that's going to be what we have to focus on.
Yeah, it's going to be basketball season before too long. And I will say that the Kentucky team is looking like it's going to be a good one. Cole, I want to kind of look big picture of where Kentucky football is right now. They're 2-2. You mentioned that South Carolina game, one where they were leading at one point, and then 2 turnovers in the span of about 3 plays kind of got the ball rolling in South Carolina's direction. 1, where do you feel like this team is right now? And 2, a lot of us have looked at Mark Stoops and kind of wondered, about his future. What do you feel like his standing is at this point? Also understanding he's got a pretty hefty buyout if there was to be a move.
Yeah. No, like you said, Kentucky did something pretty unusual for it against South Carolina. They won the coin toss, and they chose to they elected to receive the ball. They wanted to start on offense, and it seemed like it was going to work. They got the offense looked as good as it has all season. They got a quick touchdown, and then the defense let up one against South Carolina, but you get the field goal, the defense gets a stop. You have a chance to go up 2 scores. And then, like you said, a 3-play skid, but it's a bit larger than that too. Cutter Boley gets just absolutely trampled in the pocket, coughs up the football. That's taken back for a scoop and score. He comes out. There's a quick short run, I think, that's not good for a whole lot. And then his very next play is a pick 6. It was an RPO kind of play, slant across the middle, and he just misplaced it a little bit. The receiver's only able to get his hands on it, tips it into the hands of a South Carolina defender, who takes it to the house. And it was one of those, I've said a few times, that when he caught it, I didn't really think it was going to be a pick 6. And then it's just the way the dominoes fell. They get back on offense again, naturally, another touchdown. You have another shot, and they have a turnover on downs on that one. There's another interception for the game's over. It was a 21-0 second quarter, and just an absolute disaster. And it kind of gets ignored in the grand scheme of things because of how bad that second quarter was. But you had a defense that only allowed 1 more South Carolina touchdown the entire rest of the game. Your defense was giving you every chance, and the offense was just absolutely dead in the water every chance it got. It was just 3 points in the second half, a field goal from your kicker, who's still perfect on the season. So there's one promise in terms of point scoring, but it's not good. It's not good. The offense has been something that's been a problem all season long, and It's the first time in a long time Kentucky's had any kind of continuity with its offensive coordinator, bringing back Hamden. They had Scangrello, 2 separate Liam Cohen tenures. It's been all over the place offensively, and it's still not figured out. And that's not to say that there's not talent on that offense. The offensive line has improved. Seth McGowan looked like a superstar at running back, but the passing game just can't get going. Now, as for the bigger picture stuff, where Mark Stoops is at, I put him firmly in the camp of too expensive to fire. Listen, I cover Kentucky, and I'm not one to say that Kentucky can ever be successful in football. I'm not one to say that Kentucky is just a basketball school, but we also have to understand this is Kentucky. If you were to fire Mark Stoops before December 1st, his buyout would be larger than Gus Malzahn's was at Auburn. It would be the second largest in college football. Now, you can say what you want to about bad contracts. Should he have been offered that? Maybe not. At the time, maybe. He had 2 10-win seasons, was bringing Kentucky to new heights. But Kentucky is not the kind of school that's going to spend more than Auburn to fire a football coach. Second only Texas A&M, and I think anybody in the country would say that Texas A&M Jimbo Fisher, that was insane, right? Like, that was one of the craziest things I think I've ever seen story-wise. So it's just not going to happen. And on top of that, I don't see Stoops walking away on his own either. If he were to leave right now, he would owe money to Kentucky, and he's not going to do that. Why would he do that? But, people have pretty firmly turned on it. There's not a lot of optimism. And it was something I talked about after the South Carolina game. But, last year there was a bunch of anger and resentment and this, that, and quite frankly, there wasn't that after South Carolina. And that to me is worse. I wrote a column about it, and I said, in a relationship, right? You think of coaching in the school as a relationship. The relationship is not dead when there's fighting. The relationship is dead when the fighting stops, when there's nothing but pure apathy. When you get blown out against South Carolina and you get embarrassed and everyone's just like, oh well, when's basketball start? And that's where it is right now in Kentucky.
The thing, too, that I think is worth pointing out when you talk about that buyout, we are in a new era of college sports where you could use that money for rev share. There are other things that have to be accounted for when it comes to if you're wanting to pay a hefty buyout. I think that's a good point. You mentioned the passing game, and it feels like, really kind of 2 years in a row for Kentucky that they've been searching to try to make something happen. Georgia fans will remember last year, former Bulldogs quarterback Brock Vandagriff, that didn't work out. Now you've got Cutter Boley, you've got Zach Calzada. What's the situation as far as who is going to play quarterback, and where do you kind of put, what the biggest problem has been with the passing game to this point?
Oh boy, where to start? Zach Calzada is listed on the injury report, availability report as probable. He's getting healthier and healthier. I would still expect Cutter Boley to start against Georgia. At this point, what do you have to lose? He's the quarterback of the future. Zach Calzada is a 7th-year veteran. It hasn't worked under either of them, so you might as well give Boley reps, I guess. Now, as for what hasn't worked, there's been a lot of things. I wrote a 1,700-word piece kind of breaking down that yesterday, and there's a few things. Some of the problems against South Carolina, Cutter Boley was holding onto the football too long. He's a redshirt freshman. Some of those throws you're just going to have to make, and maybe that would be better under Zach Calzada, and maybe not. Zach Calzada missed his fair share of throws as well before he got injured against Ole Miss with his shoulder. But I think it's a grander part of the problem that the way they're going about the passing game. One, this is supposedly a really, really deep wide receiver room. You've got 9 guys on the 2-deep depth chart, and 3 of them haven't even gotten in a game yet. One of them, I think, might be on a milk carton somewhere. I haven't seen him. And the others just aren't getting open. Bush Hamden talked about that on Tuesday. He said, I don't know if we need to run bunches or stacks, but we have to get guys open. And right now they're just not. And the problem is you don't have guys open, so you got the quarterback holding onto the ball longer, and then he's taking a sack, and then there's a few chances where they have gotten open, and they're just not found. It seems like Kentucky's tight ends are more wide receivers than the actual wide receivers are right now. You also have the fact that the running backs haven't really been integrated into the passing game all that often, which is interesting. Those are 2 very talented running backs in Dante Dowdell and Seth McGowan, but neither of them have really gotten a chance. Seth McGowan's only caught 1 pass for 5 yards against Ole Miss, but neither of those guys have been super involved yet. And Kentucky's had a real over-reliance on when they do pass it, it's either in the backfield or it's going yard. And as Bush Hampton pointed out, there's a severe lack of efficiency with the deep ball right now. Some of those are overthrown. Some of those are just into a ton of coverage. I mean, even the drive that Kentucky scored opening the game against South Carolina, there was a very near interception in that one that Kentucky got kind of lucky wasn't picked off by South Carolina. So it's just everything, quite frankly, and what's wrong with the passing game. There's not a lot right with it right now, and that's a clear problem with this offense. You talk so much about we can't be one-dimensional. You want to be a multi-dimensional team. It helps your running backs to be more effective if it's not obvious. That's another thing Bush Hampton said is we can't make it so obvious when we're going to pass. You just get down to 3rd and 10, and it's very obvious you're going to pass the football. And it usually doesn't work, especially against teams like South Carolina and like Georgia this week, who are able to get in the backfield. If you know a pass is coming, then send your pass rush, get them back there. But I wrote about it in that same analysis piece. I said, for a team that harps so much on not being one-dimensional, I've yet to see a second dimension to this offense. So, there's a lot of fault in that.
The one thing that has been going well for Kentucky at this point, you mentioned Seth McGowan. Seth, and this run game, how would you describe Seth McGowan as a running back, and what has allowed Kentucky to run the ball as well as it has to this point?
I think you look at Kentucky's history, and Kentucky's always had a strong history of running the ball. In my recency, you have Ray Davis on the Buffalo Bills right now. Chris Rodriguez was on the Commanders for a while. Benny Snell was on the Steelers for a while. All those guys were really great there. And, starting this season, Seth McGowan, before the South Carolina game, I believe was on track to break Ray Davis's all-purpose touchdowns record and Benny Snell's rushing touchdowns record for a single season. So really hot start for him. Obviously, despite what you saw with 6 sacks against South Carolina, some of those, like I said, were Cutter Bully's fault. He admitted that after the game. He said, I take accountability for that. I've got to get rid of the ball faster. It's a much improved offensive line from last year. And obviously last year too, you had Chip Trayanum, who was supposed to be your number 1 back, get injured with a broken hand preseason. You're kind of left to rely on a couple depth pieces there. And Jason Patterson, who's still out there, receiving punts as a young guy. And Wilcox, who's a entirely different situation, we'll say. But I think, running the football has been kind of Kentucky's identity for a long time. And McGowan himself is exactly what you want in a running back. I think, he's really resonated with me in a lot of things he said. He put up 2 touchdowns against Ole Miss, and they lost a heartbreaker there. And, someone asked him about it after the game. They're like, how does it feel playing against an SEC school again? You're back at this level after all of his issues in his career that led him to have to go down and play community college football and then at New Mexico State after starting off at Oklahoma. And you were like, how does it feel to come back to this level and score 2 touchdowns? And his answer was, I don't really care. He said, I don't think anybody in the state of Kentucky is happy that one player had an okay game. We want to win the football game. And he didn't. And they asked him again the next week against Eastern Michigan, another strong showing. They did win the football game. And he's like, I said it last week, I'll say it again this week. My personal accomplishments don't really matter to me. As long as we win the game, that's all that matters. So I think, when it comes to what you want out of a running back, not only is he extremely talented, not only does he have a much better offensive line kind of helping him there, he's got the right mentality to really, make it work in this offense. And they're going to need him to, because right now he's about all they have.
Switching sides to the defense, what has been your read on this Kentucky defense to this point? And give us 3-4 players that you feel like have stood out to this point on defense.
Yeah, I feel like maybe more than most, I tend to have a lot of confidence in Brad White's defenses. Generally they're pretty reliable. They had a really weird off game against Eastern Michigan. It was kind of implied to me that it might have just been a lack of motivation against a lower tier opponent that was coming off a loss at home to an FCS school. And, with all due respect to Long Island, not a very good FCS school at that. So I think there was a lack of focus going into that one that led to some questionable defensive plays. And they've been imperfect. It's something Brad White spoke about yesterday, and he spoke about it all season. He said, if we had 80 plays, I think 74 of them are like top tier football. It's just the ones that aren't. We have to be consistent. And there was one against South Carolina, a curl that ended up going for a big play. And he said that might have been the worst football we've played as a unit all year long. But like I said, in spite of that, you give up the touchdown on the opening drive of South Carolina's opening drive, I should say. But you go the rest of the game, 35 points looks like you gave up a lot on defense, but 14 of those points were from the defense themselves. And they only gave up one more touchdown there in the first half, and to go into the half down, I think 28-10, and then they gave up one touchdown the entire second half. South Carolina starts with the football at halftime as a result of that coin toss, and the defense comes out and shuts them down. That's a chance to get your momentum back, and the offense just can't capitalize on it. But overall, the defense has been really sturdy for the most part, and there are flaws. There are some times they'll give off some of those big plays, those explosive plays. We saw that against Ole Miss, but generally speaking, I have some confidence in this defense. And in terms of who to look for there, I think you could go position group by position group. The linebackers, the inside linebackers especially, you got David Rayner, the kind of guy with a coach's comm in his helmet. Alex Afari is a veteran, even though he didn't even know he was going to be playing football when he came to America from Italy. He thought he was registering for soccer, and now he's an elite kind of inside linebacker. I think, up front, you've got some really, really strong players there. McKees Humphrey Grace has looked really, really strong. I want to highlight Tavion Gadsden, who suffered a pretty big injury in his career and has kind of fought his way back into this position, made a really big play with a sack on Lenore Sellers last week. And then on top of that, David Gusta is very strong up front there. You got Khalil Saunders, who's always a beast up there. And then in the backfield, Ty Bryant. Not only is he a very talented player, he got 2 interceptions on Austin Simmons in that Ole Miss game there in the first quarter. You talk to the guy and you can't help but love him. One of those players who just has such a positive attitude about everything, and no matter what's going on, and is really fun, funny guy. And I like Ty Bryant quite a bit. And then, with DJ Waller being out for Kentucky still, he hasn't played since he suffered a hamstring injury in practice after Toledo. You've seen a lot of people trying to fill his role as a corner. JQ Hardaway obviously was expected to be a starting corner. He's kind of filled that role pretty well. He's a bit inconsistent at times, but overall he's pretty solid. We've seen a lot of Terion Nichols, Keysheed Scott, who's listed as a nickel on the depth chart, but has been kind of filling in a lot of those roles. So there's a lot of guys in the defense that can really get out there and make some plays.
Take a quick break, come back and talk specifically about this week, what we've heard from Mark Stoops and company, and give a quick preview on how we think this thing will play out. Cole, whenever we do these preview podcasts, I always feel bad for my guests because I pretty much just sit back and let them run the show. But I did want to give you an opportunity to ask me, what's a big question or two you have about Georgia going into this game? I'm sure that a lot of people who have been getting ready for this game have some questions. Is there anything that kind of sticks out to you as far as questions you have about Georgia?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my biggest thing for you, Georgia a lot better than I do. And so far, we saw them play that close game against Tennessee. We saw that loss last week against Alabama, a close one, but a tough one there. Kirby Smart's thorn in his side with Alabama, regardless of who's coaching, it seems. But obviously there was weather concerns in the FCS game, but there's been a lot of talk this season that Georgia isn't Georgia this year. And I wanted to know your kind of take on that. Where is this team weak? Do you think that this team still has a chance to kind of live up to what's expected of Georgia, which is very high? I feel like an 8-win season, Kentucky would be celebrating that, but for Georgia, that's unacceptable. So where do you feel like Georgia's at this season?
I think they're still playoff caliber. I think right now, as much as some fans were frustrated with Gunnar Stockton and Mike Bobo on offense, I mean, the defense is the biggest issue. And for me, and it'll go into some of this Kentucky game, but, the following week when they play at Auburn, they just have to generate pass rush. I mean, they just struggled in that area really against Tennessee and Alabama. And Alabama, that was a big part of the conversation going into it, was being able to affect Ty Simpson, and they just didn't do it enough. I mean, he was pressured. I think Pro Football Focus had it at 11 pressures, and you compare that to the Florida State game that Alabama lost, Seminoles had 29. I mean, they really affected Ty Simpson, and Georgia struggled to do so. And Kirby Smart was asked about the lack of pressure, and he honestly put more of that on Alabama's success and said, that you had a quarterback operating at a high level. And I do think there's some of that. But again, I mean, this is just a pass rush that to this point has not lived up to the hope. There were a lot of guys that I would describe as young but talented, but you needed those guys to take the next step this year. And you've had good moments from Chris Cole, who's an inside linebacker, who even at inside linebacker is probably their best pass rusher. Quintavious Johnson flashed some, but other than that, a few good plays from Joseph Jonah-Ajonye. They just have not consistently created pressure, and I think that's just a situation that just makes it even harder for the guys behind them. I mean, the secondary has gotten torched and given up plays, but at a certain point, you can't let a quarterback like Ty Simpson stand back there and pick you apart, because he will, and he did. So I think this is a team that can bounce back, can still be around that 10-win mark, which, by being able to do that, you're still very much in the playoff hunt. But the questions for me, Cole, are on the defense. They have got to have better play up front. If they can get it, then yeah, they can still be in that playoff hunt like a lot of people expect them.
Absolutely. And when you look at that offense, I mean, obviously you talked a little bit about Stockton and how he hasn't necessarily been what a lot of people wanted him to be, but something that was talked about a lot by Brad White yesterday, you guys have 5 running backs really that are viable options that are playing a lot of football. I mean, what does that do for you guys as an offense, and how do opposing teams even go about planning for 5 different running backs? I mean, Brad White said a lot of it's going to we're just going to have to focus scheme, I guess. I mean, you have to know who the running backs are and what their strengths are, but you can't create a game plan for all 5 of those guys.
No, I mean, I think even on the Georgia side, it kind of complicates things with knowing who's going to get the ball. And what they did against Alabama was a lot of riding the hot hand. It was Chauncey Bowens, who's a redshirt freshman, who, I mean, probably, I think, pretty safely, his best game as a Bulldog was against Alabama. He averaged somewhere around like 9 yards a carry. I mean, he was on fire as part of a run game that almost averaged 7 yards a carry. And I mean, to me, with running back, especially in the SEC, it's sort of a safety in numbers thing, because you're going to lose some of these backs over the course of a long season. But having him, Nate Frazier's had some fumble issues. They've got to get him right. But I expect to see him a good bit against Kentucky. I think they want to instill some confidence after he had a really critical fumble against Alabama. Josh McCray's kind of become the short yardage back, the goal line back, and he's done a very good job. Scored against Alabama, walked it off against Tennessee. They've got really good depth. Cash Jones, a third down back, who's gotten involved some too. And even some of the other guys who, interested to see how much we see Dwight Phillips Jr. He didn't play a ton against Alabama, but he had hurt his foot against Tennessee, so maybe that had something to do with it. And you got Bo Walker, a true freshman. So they're in a good spot as far as their depth there. And I can see them grounding and pounding this game, understanding that, they've got the guys to be able to kind of enforce their will against Kentucky and see how far that can take them. Cole, you mentioned what Brad White had to say. What else has sort of been the conversation from the Kentucky side this week? What they've said going into a huge test on the road.
Yeah, I mean, White spoke about the 5 running backs, how a lot of that's going to be scheme-based. He also talked about Stockton a little bit. Obviously, Gunnar Stockton's no Lenora Sellers in terms of what he's able to do, but he is a guy who's capable of running the football if he needs to, is capable of getting those extra yardage there. That was something Kentucky struggled a lot with against Sellers. And, Sellers is Sellers. We all know what he can do. But he was able to really break a lot of tackles back there and really hurt Kentucky. It felt like they had a handful of third down conversions and fourth down conversions, and quite a bit of those were Lenora Seller rushes. So, he talked about having to plan for Stockton. And, someone made a comment that with the way Stockton plays and the 5 running backs, it doesn't really feel like Georgia necessarily. But, Brad White kind of said it's still Georgia. They're going to be strong. They're going to be physical. They're going to be fast. They're going to hit you with what they got. So that was a lot of the conversation defensively, was just how Kentucky can kind of try to plan for some of those offensive weapons, even if, some of those guys have had some mistakes, like you said, trying to build confidence after the fumble, but it's still a very strong Georgia defense, especially as far as Kentucky's concerned. Offensively, a lot of the conversation was just more about, you said that the pass rush hasn't quite been what you want it to be at Georgia, but still, coming off a game at South Carolina, in which you give up 6 sacks, some on the offensive line, some on the quarterback, how they can better protect Cutter Boley, how they can get him in better positions to make plays, and how they can get wide receivers open, because that's been the biggest problems for them all year. And in terms of specifics on the offensive side, I think there was less of those because there was more questions naturally surrounding Kentucky's own flaws as opposed to the defense, which we had an opportunity and asked a lot more Georgia-focused questions. In terms of the players, this is one that'll be fun for Tavion Gadsden. He's from the state of Georgia, so he said there's a lot of people that they might be riding with me, but Georgia's still their team, so it's going to be fun for him to come back to the state, play in Athens. A lot of the players said that they're excited to go back on the road. There's always a chip on your shoulder when you head on the road, even if playing at Georgia hasn't gone the best for Kentucky in recent memory. Really, playing Georgia at all hasn't gone the best for Kentucky in recent memory, even in spite of how close last year was. Southern saying almost only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades, and the reality of the fact is Kentucky hasn't beaten Georgia since 2009, never under Mark Stoops. So that was really a lot of the conversation in terms of what Kentucky had to say about Georgia.
So we are recording this on Thursday afternoon. So at this point, as we're talking, we've had one availability report. What's the latest on the Kentucky injury situation, and anything that you think folks listening should just keep an eye on from the Kentucky side once we get to Saturday?
Yeah, the biggest thing that stuck out to me immediately, Zach Calzada was listed as probable, which means for all intents and purposes, he is an option. I still think they're going to run with Cutter Boley, but if things start getting out of hand, Boley's making too many mistakes, it is possible we would see a Zach Calzada come back in the game, which is a lot better than, no disrespect, of course, but a lot better than seeing a Bo Allen come into the game. And then also DJ Waller back on questionable. That's kind of where I think he started out as doubtful last week before being ruled out again. There was a lot of talk about him this week, how they, with the hamstrings and the way he plays, like they want to make sure he's 100%. Ty Bryant said that, he can't wait to get DJ Waller back because he's such a big part of this defense. He played last year, was a big part of that win at Ole Miss. The only SEC win Kentucky got last year, quite frankly, and I think literally the biggest win of Mark Stoops' tenure at Kentucky in terms of ranking-wise. He's listed as questionable, so we'll see. I'm still not really anticipating he'll play, and if he does, I'm expecting him to be limited against Georgia, but that was interesting to see. And then, just a lot more names in the out department. No one that really sticks out to me too much. Obviously, most of those are presumably injury related, except for Jamarion Wilcox, who, has his issues off the field. He was also listed as out. In terms of other players questionable, we just had Devin Smith and Avaselm. Avaselm, backup offensive lineman, I feel probably lives most of his life in questionable on the availability reports. I feel like he's there every single week, no matter what's going on. And Devin Smith's a guy who also we don't tend to see as much of. But one reassuring thing is a lot of the players who seem to get a little bit shaken up, except for Jaden Smith. DB Jaden Smith being out is a bit of a concern. I think he was shaken up pretty bad against South Carolina. He's been playing a decent amount of football, but that is a little bit concerning. But he plays at a position which, in terms of who the starting designation goes to, there's 3 different oars. So if you're going to have one guy go out, then it might as well be that position, the nickel. So we'll see about that. Those are really my takeaways. Obviously, 4 of those outs apart from Wilcox, or 3 of those outs apart from Wilcox, have been there all season long with season-ending injuries to David Washington Jr., who primarily played on special teams last year, Preston Bowman, and I believe Nick Smith, who are both freshmen, have yet to play.
Yeah, Jamarion Wilcox had a really good game against Georgia last year, so that is definitely notable there. On the Georgia side, only really a notable thing, Ernest Green being ruled out. That's the starting right tackle. He has been limited since week one. He played the first half against Tennessee and came out. Did not play against Alabama, so that's notable. But also listed as out tight end Ethan Barbour, center Malachi Tolliver, and receiver Thomas Blackshear. So no real surprises really there. Even with Ernest Green, though, it was interesting that he has been listed as out from the very first availability report. All right, Cole, looking to Saturday, what needs to go right for Kentucky? What did they have to accomplish really on either side of the ball to have a chance to make this interesting, to try to pull off a huge upset on the road?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it'd be a cop-out to say everything, but no, defensively, you need to just do enough. I feel like anytime you're playing a team the caliber of Georgia, the goal is not, I mean, it's obviously the goal, but the reality is not to be perfect. You're not going to shut out Georgia, especially not in Athens. Your goal is to do enough to give your offense a chance. And then you put it on their shoulders. And in terms of what we've seen this year, that's what this game is going to be won or lost by, is the Kentucky offense, I really feel. They need to complete passes. They need to get guys open. They need to not take as many sacks, not have as many turnovers. They need to keep Seth McGowan and Dante, if he's more involved. They need to keep them going, keep them hot. Don't just abandon the run and try to go super pass heavy. The biggest thing I'm looking for is just, what does this passing attack looks like? It was a focus really heavily on Tuesday about what needs to change with this passing attack. We heard a lot of different ideas, a lot of different suggestions, a lot of different things that need to change. But what is this passing attack going to look like against Georgia? Because if the passing attack is not there, Kentucky's not going to win. And this is a game that, looking at the track record, they're probably not going to win anyway. So if you're going to get that win, we need to see a lot of improvement in the passing game, and we need to see the defense do enough to allow a potentially improved offense to make this a game. I think that if Kentucky is to win this game, it'd be kind of along the lines of last year. Obviously, that one was in Lexington, but it's not going to be probably very high scoring if you do win it, and it's not going to be one that isn't close. If Kentucky's going to pull off a victory in Athens, it's probably going to be a low-scoring, close game, and that means being as close to perfect as you can be on offense and doing enough on defense to keep Georgia from scoring too many points.
God help us all on the Dawgs 24/7 staff if we are treated to another 13-12 kind of game. I did want to read on Facebook, Jeff Horton earlier said, if it's another 13-12, I'm going to scream. And I think there's a lot of folks over on the Junkyard that I think would say the same thing. All right, Cole, what do you think we are going to see on Saturday? How do you see this thing playing out, noon kickoff, and what we'll see from the Bulldogs and the Wildcats?
In terms of what I'm expecting going into Saturday in Athens, I think the defense can. I'm not going to necessarily put money on it, because we saw last time Kentucky played in Athens, there was 51 points put on their heads. But I think the defense can be reliable enough to give the offense chances. And then everything I said I need to see from the offense, I expect to see none of it. I don't. I expect... And that sounds mean, it's not that I'm rooting for that to happen. I'm not betting against Kentucky. I'm not, trying to put Kentucky down at a time when a lot of the fan base is looking for any reason to find positivity. But they've given me nothing so far. And, I'm a reporter. All I can do is go off of what I've seen, what I've heard, what I know. And what I know is that this Kentucky passing attack is not good right now. And it's Georgia. If there was ever a game to figure things out, it's not Georgia. That's not the kind of game you want to be going into saying we got to tinker with stuff and we got to figure it. You had your shots against Eastern Michigan. You had your shots against Toledo even to start the season. Arguably should have had your shots against a South Carolina team that came into that game last week, losing 2 straight after starting the season ranked number 10, I believe. Now they're unranked, but it's just not the kind of game that you get the chance to figure things out. And I don't expect to see much different from the offense than what we saw against South Carolina. I would hope the protection will be a little bit better, that the offensive tackles have kind of learned from some of those mistakes, aren't going to be as susceptible to those twist moves that South Carolina was pulling off, or at the very least are communicating better, that they can do a bit better with the protection. They can do a bit better about making it less obvious what they're going to do. But until I see that happen, I feel like that's a lot of the sentiment with Kentucky right now is I'll believe it when I see it, and I haven't seen it. So in terms of what I think is going to happen, I think that the defense will play as well as they can, and the offense just won't be able to put up too many points against this Bulldog defense. And I could see it being close. Could also see Georgia running away with it in the end. So we'll see.
Yeah, man, like you were explaining, it's just the reality of the situation. Kentucky's still looking for answers on offense, and to do it against Georgia, and specifically to do it on the road, that's not going to be the easiest task. Because we're going to go through some score predictions from Dogs 24/7. I'm picking Georgia 34-14. The biggest thing for me, I want to see if Georgia can start this game hot, because I think this sets up for maybe a sleepwalk from the Georgia side. You got a noon kick. You're coming off that loss to Alabama. Very interested. I think this is homecoming, so you might, not have to worry about the crowd, but how much the crowd's going to be into it? They watched a 33-game home win streak get snapped last week. I think Georgia, the first probably half of the first quarter, going to be kind of quiet, and I think they get going on the way to a 34-14 victory. Ben Wolk has Georgia 38-13. Going through some of the other scores, Olivia Sayer has Georgia 31-13, and Kip Adams has Georgia 34-14. Cole, I really appreciate you popping on. I think this was a great preview podcast. I do want to give you an opportunity. Plug social media, anything you guys got going on the Cat's Paws. Let the folks know if they want to learn more about Kentucky, what they can be on the lookout for.
Yeah, absolutely. All of my stories are posted on the Cat's Paws. That's a 247 Sports Kentucky affiliate, so you can see all my stories there. I'm on the message board pretty frequently. My Twitter is Cole Parke. That's PARKE_WSC. The Cat's Paws also releases bi-weekly print editions of all of our football and basketball stuff. We also have our basketball yearbook set to come out shortly. We looked at every single player, every single opponent, non-conference and conference, and all kinds of stuff in that. So those are always fun to read and fun to hold once you put all the work into making that happen for months and months and months. So, we got that coming out, and then that's really the most places to find me. I'm also on, I do radio every Monday with the Big Blue Insider. And then I'm also on Believe in Kentucky, a Believe podcast. So plenty of places to find me if you're interested in my content, and appreciate anybody checking out what I do. And happy to be a part of the 247 Sports team, starting my first season on the Kentucky Beat this year. So not my first season on the Kentucky Beat in general. I was here. I've been here for 5 years now, but my first season on the Kentucky Beat with 247. So excited to kind of be a newcomer in that way and keep going with some consistent coverage.
Yeah, super excited to have you on, and passed a big initiation with the preview podcast, but you did a great job. And hey, also, proud 24/7 SEC poll voter. We've had some fun having some discussion with that this year.
Yeah, I had a fun one. I think I ranked Kentucky 17th in the latest one out of 16 teams. So,
when you got a chance to throw Swanee back in, you just kind of have to do it.
Hey, maybe had Tulane on the mind. Maybe John Summerall's already up here. Who knows? But we'll see.
Well, we'll end it right there. I want to, again, thanks to Cole for popping on. Thanks to everyone who watched this live, everyone who is watching or listening to this after the fact. Go subscribe to Dogs 24/7. Go subscribe to the Cat's Paws. A lot of great content coming up to the start of this game. It's going to be an early one on Saturday, but we're going to have a lot of good content. Go subscribe to the Dogs 24/7 YouTube. Subscribe to the Junkyard Dawgcast wherever you get your podcasts. Please rate and review. That helps us out a ton. Check out our TikTok. Got all kinds of good content, and we can't wait for Saturday to get here and to be back between the hedges. So we will end the episode right there. For Cole Parke, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.